Welcome back to Avoidant Decoded. If you truly want to understand avoidant behavior on a deeper level and learn how to create real, lasting connection without chasing or pressure, make sure you join our membership for exclusive insights and deeper breakdowns. Today, we're diving into something most people completely misunderstand, the quiet truth about what actually makes an avoidant person feel safe enough to stay. What if the reason they pulled away was never because they didn't feel something, but because what they felt was too much, too fast, and too overwhelming to hold on to? What if the more you tried to get closer, the more it quietly triggered their need to protect themselves? Most people believe love grows through intensity, through effort, through chasing answers. But what if the deepest connections are actually built in the opposite way? What if the real key isn't doing more, but learning how to create a presence that feels safe enough for them to finally stay? Most people think attraction is all about chemistry, that instant spark, the rush of emotions, the pull you feel right away. But when you're dealing with someone who has avoidant tendencies, it doesn't work like that. Intensity alone doesn't hold their attention for long. There can be physical attraction, sure, but that doesn't automatically turn into emotional connection. In many cases, it barely touches what actually matters to them. Avoidant individuals aren't drawn in by emotional chasing or big, overwhelming displays of affection. Their entire system is built around protecting their independence and feeling emotionally safe. Because of that, what reaches them isn't loud or forceful. It's subtle. It's psychological. It's the kind of presence that slips past their defenses instead of triggering them. And once you understand that, everything about how you approach them starts to shift. You stop trying so hard to impress, convince, or win them over. You stop chasing or over-giving emotionally. Instead, you start developing a presence that naturally draws them in, without pressure. One of the most powerful things they respond to is emotional self-containment. Not being cold or distant, but being grounded enough that your emotional state doesn't depend on how they act. Avoidants are extremely sensitive to expectations. The moment they feel like they're responsible for someone else's emotions, their instinct is to pull away. But when they're around someone who can enjoy connection without clinging to it, something inside them softens. They feel less threatened. Your calmness sends a message without you even saying anything. It shows that you can be close without losing yourself, that you're emotionally available without being overwhelming. And strangely enough, that's often when they start moving closer to you. Not because they suddenly become open overnight, but because the connection no longer feels like something that will trap them or take away their freedom. Another thing that impacts them more deeply than raw attraction is emotional depth combined with control. A lot of people mistake emotional restraint for disinterest, but avoidants don't always see it that way. When emotions are expressed with intention and balance, it creates curiosity. And for an avoidant, curiosity is far more powerful than intensity. Intensity burns fast. Curiosity stays. It keeps their mind engaged long after you're gone. When someone reveals everything too quickly, it can feel overwhelming and heavy to them. But when there's depth without chaos, it creates space for intrigue. They start wondering. They start observing instead of retreating. And observation matters, because avoidants tend to connect internally long before they show anything outwardly. There's also something else that reaches them on a deeper level: emotional consistency without pressure. Most people react to distance by pushing harder, asking for reassurance, or trying to force closeness. But avoidants react strongly to pressure, even when it's subtle. The more they feel pushed, the more they withdraw. But when someone stays emotionally steady without forcing anything, their guard slowly starts to come down. Consistency creates predictability, and predictability creates safety. And for someone avoidant, safety will always matter more than intensity. This is why calm confidence affects them more deeply than emotional pursuit ever could. When you have your own life, your own direction, and your own emotional stability, without constantly needing validation, it becomes unexpectedly attractive to them. It's not that they don't want connection, it's that they're afraid of losing themselves inside it. So when they meet someone who already feels whole, the relationship stops feeling like a threat and starts feeling like a choice. There's also a quiet kind of power in emotional mystery. Not games, not manipulation, but the natural mystery that comes from someone who doesn't overshare or constantly explain everything they feel. Avoidants are highly observant. They watch, they notice, they take their time. And when someone carries emotional depth without putting it all on display, it pulls them in on a deeper level. What they fear isn't love itself. It's the loss of freedom, the pressure, the feeling of being consumed by someone else's needs. That's why the people who impact them the most are usually the ones who stay grounded, even while caring deeply. People who can love without gripping tightly. People who can connect without making someone else responsible for their emotional stability. And ironically, that kind of energy becomes far more attractive than physical chemistry alone. Lust might grab their attention for a moment, but emotional safety speaks to their nervous system. And when they begin to associate your presence with peace instead of pressure, something shifts inside them. Their defenses don't disappear overnight, but they stop feeling as necessary. That's when attraction starts to move beyond the surface. It becomes something deeper, something emotional, even if they can't fully explain it. Curiosity plays a big role here. When they can't fully figure you out, their mind keeps returning to you. They think about you, they replay moments, they start building emotional connection quietly in their own way. This is often how attachment begins for them, not through overwhelming passion, but through subtle, psychological intrigue that lingers. Desire creates excitement, but curiosity keeps their attention alive. And alongside that, consistency without pressure continues to do its work. Many avoidants are used to emotional instability once things get deeper. They expect mood swings, conflict, demands, or pressure as intimacy grows. So when they experience the opposite, someone calm, steady, and emotionally balanced, it feels unfamiliar. That steadiness starts to rewrite what connection means to them. It shows them that closeness doesn't have to come with chaos. Intensity might create short-term attraction, but emotional calm creates a sense of regulation. And that feeling of calm can become deeply compelling for someone who has spent most of their life expecting emotional disruption. There's another kind of closeness that avoidant individuals respond to very strongly, and that's being understood without feeling emotionally trapped. One of their deepest fears is losing control when they open up. Being fully seen can feel overwhelming, especially if it comes with pressure, questioning, or expectations they're not ready to meet. But when someone gently notices their patterns, their silence, and their emotional shifts without pushing them to explain everything, something important begins to shift inside them. It creates a sense of connection without intrusion. Most people try to build intimacy by demanding access, by wanting answers, clarity, and immediate openness. But avoidants often connect more deeply through acceptance rather than pursuit. When your presence communicates, "I see you, but I'm not here to force anything out of you," it feels far safer than intense emotional effort ever could. This is why giving space becomes so powerful. A lot of people interpret distance as rejection and react by trying to close the gap quickly. But avoidants experience space differently. For them, it's often a way to regulate themselves, a way to regain balance when emotions start to feel overwhelming. So when someone allows that space without reacting with frustration, guilt, passive aggression, or emotional punishment, it completely disrupts what they expect. They're often used to distance leading to conflict. They expect withdrawal to trigger accusations or pressure. But when space is met with emotional maturity instead of panic, it creates relief. And that sense of relief can be deeply attractive to someone who is always bracing for emotional intensity. Grounded confidence also affects them more than most people realize. Avoidants are very sensitive to emotional dependence, even in small ways. When someone constantly looks to them for reassurance, validation, or emotional stability, it creates a kind of pressure they instinctively move away from. But quiet confidence sends a completely different message. When you're emotionally steady, when your sense of self doesn't depend on their approval, it shows independence. It tells them you can stand on your own emotionally. You're choosing the connection, not relying on it to feel okay. That difference matters a lot to avoidants, because what often scares them isn't closeness itself, but the idea of becoming responsible for someone else's emotional world. So when they meet someone who feels grounded and self-assured, attraction starts to form in a much deeper way than simple desire ever could. Another important dynamic is how emotions are handled during conflict. Avoidants are highly sensitive to escalation. Raised voices, reactive behavior, or emotional overwhelm can quickly trigger their need to shut down or pull away. Intensity doesn't bring them closer, it usually pushes them further back. But calm, clear communication changes everything. When you can express your needs without emotional volatility, it allows them to stay present instead of retreating. Conversations start to feel manageable rather than threatening. Over time, presence becomes more important than passion, because real intimacy isn't built on emotional highs and lows. It's built on repeated moments of safety, steadiness, and emotional balance. Having a full life outside the relationship is another thing they find deeply attractive. Avoidants are often turned off by over-attachment, or when a relationship becomes someone's entire identity. If a person gives up their individuality, their goals, or their personal life just to hold on to the connection, it can feel suffocating to them. But someone who has their own purpose, their own direction, and a meaningful life creates a completely different experience. Purpose signals independence. It shows that the relationship is part of your life, not the center of everything. There's no silent expectation for them to carry your happiness or become your only emotional focus. And ironically, that sense of freedom often creates more space for real attachment to grow naturally. There's also a quiet strength in being emotionally honest without attaching expectations to it. Avoidants often assume that emotional expression comes with hidden demands. They expect that if someone opens up, it means they'll need to respond, fix, or provide reassurance right away. But when someone shares how they feel simply because it's true, not to get validation or emotional rescue, it feels completely different. It becomes honesty without pressure, and that kind of emotional freedom can deeply disarm them because it challenges everything they've come to expect from closeness. They begin to realize that connection doesn't always mean obligation or losing themselves, that it's possible to be close without feeling consumed. Physical attraction on its own doesn't change their deeper patterns. It might hold their attention for a moment, but it doesn't shift how they experience connection. What truly affects them is experiencing closeness that feels safe, connection without control, depth without chaos, and care without emotional pressure. When they consistently experience that kind of presence, something begins to change in ways desire alone could never create. Attachment starts forming quietly, in places that aren't driven by intensity, but by safety and trust. Clear, calm boundaries also carry a lot of weight with avoidance. Most people try to keep a connection by increasing emotional intensity, offering constant reassurance, or trying to prove their worth again and again. But avoidants often respond more deeply to someone who can set limits with calm confidence and stand by them without becoming reactive. When you express your standards without anger, threats, or emotional punishment, it creates a different kind of safety. It shows self-respect, and that self-respect often becomes one of the most grounding and attractive things they can feel in a connection. It removes that hidden tug of war that avoidant people instinctively push against. You're not trying to control them, and at the same time you're not sacrificing yourself just to keep the connection alive. That balance matters more than most realize, because avoidants are very sensitive to moments where connection starts turning into pressure, guilt, or emotional control. But when someone stays grounded within their own boundaries, without creating drama around them, it becomes deeply appealing. Calm self-respect carries a quiet strength that feels much safer than emotional urgency or neediness. Another thing that affects them more than people expect is comfortable silence. Not distance, not emotional shutdown, but a natural, relaxed silence. Being able to share space without constantly filling it with words, reassurance, or emotional effort creates a kind of peace that many avoidants rarely experience. Most people believe connection has to be expressive and intense to feel real, but avoidants often feel closer through space rather than stimulation. Where intensity seeks constant engagement, silence allows their system to settle. And for someone used to emotional overwhelm, that sense of calm becomes incredibly attractive. When you can simply exist beside them without expecting a certain reaction or emotional performance, it communicates safety in a way they instinctively understand. There's no pressure to respond perfectly, no demand to manage your emotions, just a steady presence. And that steady presence is what slowly allows curiosity and attachment to grow. But one of the biggest shifts happens when you stop trying to influence them altogether. The moment you stop needing their validation, stop trying to secure their affection, or force clarity, the dynamic changes completely. Avoidants are naturally drawn to emotional independence. They feel safer around people who are grounded within themselves instead of needing constant reassurance from others. When your energy no longer says, "choose me," and instead quietly reflects, "I value this connection, but I'm already whole," their defenses begin to soften on their own. The connection stops feeling like pressure and starts feeling like a choice. And for someone avoidant, that sense of freedom is essential. This is why subtle presence reaches them far more deeply than emotional intensity ever could. Passion by itself cannot recreate the feeling of psychological safety. Attraction might grab attention for a moment, but it doesn't automatically build trust within their system. Avoidants are not incapable of feeling attraction. What they resist is pressure disguised as closeness. When attraction becomes tied to expectations, demands, or the fear of letting someone down, their instinct is to pull away. But a calm, emotionally grounded presence moves past those defenses almost effortlessly because it doesn't threaten their independence. And when they start associating your presence with freedom instead of emotional weight, something deeper begins to form. The feelings that stay with them aren't always intense or dramatic. More often, it's a sense of relief. Relief that they can breathe around you. Relief that closeness doesn't feel overwhelming. Relief that they're not being pushed or emotionally cornered. And along with that relief comes curiosity, a quiet pull, something they may not even fully understand themselves. This is why the strongest connections with avoidance are rarely built through traditional attraction alone. They are built through the emotional atmosphere you create, through how your presence feels inside their nervous system. People often misunderstand avoidance because they focus only on what they see on the surface, the distance, the inconsistency, the withdrawal. But internally, avoidants are constantly scanning for emotional safety. They're asking themselves whether closeness will cost them their peace, their independence, or their sense of control. That's why they respond more to how something feels than to what is said. It's not about what you want from them, it's about what your presence does to their internal state. When your energy consistently feels calm, respectful, steady, and free from hidden pressure, something rare starts to happen. Their system stops preparing for threat, and that's where real attachment begins. Not through intensity, not through chasing, not through emotional force, but through steadiness, subtle safety, and quiet consistency. Because while passion can create a spark, it's peace that creates something lasting. That's why some connections stay long after attraction fades, why some people remain unforgettable without ever trying to force themselves into someone's life, why a sense of emotional safety leaves a deeper mark than intensity ever could. In the end, the connections that truly last are not always the loudest ones. They're often the calmest, built on freedom, mutual respect, emotional stability, and the ability to stay fully yourself while still allowing closeness to grow naturally. That kind of presence is something an avoidant person doesn't forget. Avoidants aren't really running from love itself, they're running from pressure, from overwhelm, from the fear of losing themselves in the process of connection. That's why intensity alone rarely reaches them in a meaningful way. What stays with them isn't constant pursuit or emotional force, it's the feeling of safety. A calm, grounded, emotionally self-sufficient presence creates something far more powerful than temporary attraction. When someone respects space, communicates without emotional volatility, holds clear boundaries, and offers closeness without control, the avoidant nervous system slowly begins to relax. And when safety replaces pressure, attachment can finally grow in a natural way. The deepest connections with avoidance are not built by chasing. They are built through steadiness, quiet confidence, emotional maturity, and the ability to care without consuming. Because what lingers in their mind is not intensity, but relief, peace, curiosity, and the rare feeling that connection can exist without emotional risk. And that is why subtle emotional safety will always outlast temporary desire. In the end, everything comes down to one powerful truth. Avoidant individuals are not running away from love. They are protecting themselves from the feeling of being emotionally overwhelmed, controlled, or consumed. What truly reaches them is not intensity, not constant reassurance, and not the pressure to define or secure the connection, but the quiet, consistent experience of emotional safety. When you stop trying to manage their feelings, stop chasing clarity, and stop placing your sense of worth in whether they choose you, the entire dynamic shifts. Your presence begins to feel different, lighter, freer, and far less threatening. Instead of triggering their instinct to pull away, it gives them space to breathe, to feel, and to slowly move closer on their own terms. What leaves a lasting impact is not dramatic passion or emotional highs, but the steady feeling of peace they experience around you. It is the absence of pressure, the lack of emotional chaos, and the sense that they are not being forced into anything they are not ready for. When you remain grounded in yourself, when you maintain your boundaries without anger, when you communicate calmly without emotional volatility, and when you allow silence to exist without trying to fill it, you create something rare. You create an emotional environment where they no longer feel the need to defend themselves. That is where real connection begins, not through force, but through freedom, not through chasing, but through presence, not through intensity, but through consistency. When your energy communicates, "I value this connection, but I am whole on my own," it removes the hidden pressure that avoidants instinctively resist. It shows them that closeness does not have to mean losing themselves, and that being with you does not come with invisible expectations or emotional demands. Over time, this kind of presence does something powerful. Their nervous system begins to relax. The constant scanning for emotional danger starts to fade, and in that space, something deeper than attraction begins to grow. Curiosity replaces resistance, comfort replaces distance, and attachment begins to form in a way that feels natural rather than forced. The connections that truly stay with avoidant individuals are not the loudest or the most intense. They are the ones that feel safe, steady, and free. The ones where they can exist without performing, without fixing, and without feeling responsible for someone else's emotional state. What they remember is the relief of being able to just be, without pressure, without fear, and without losing themselves. That is why subtle emotional safety will always outlast temporary desire, because while passion may spark interest, it is peace that builds something real. And when someone becomes associated with that kind of peace, they are not easily forgotten.